It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Stephen Strome, former chairman and chief executive officer of the Handleman Company. Steve served as CEO for 17 years and was with the company for over 30 years. Handleman is one of the world's largest distributors of music CDs, with operations in the US, Canada, and the United Kingdom, with annual sales north of $1 billion. Steve pioneered the home video sell-through business to the mass retail marketplace, and the home entertainment industry recognized him for his accomplishments by electing him to the Video Hall of Fame. Prior to joining Handleman, Steve was a regional manager of labor relations for Frohoff Corporation and began his career with Kmart. After retiring, Steve was appointed executive in residence at the Mike Ilitch School of Business at Wayne State University, and he also mentors students in order to help them achieve their career goals. Steve earned his master's from Wayne State and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Hillsdale College. Steve Strome, welcome into the corner office.
Thanks, Brant. I appreciate it.
Where does the podcast find you today?
Finds me in Michigan.
Michigan, all right.
The motor, right near the Motor City.
Near the Motor City, and weather is still summer. Is it right in the heat of it, or things simmering down a little bit? Where are we in mid-August here with you?
We just had a hot spell last week, and this week is supposed to be perfect weather, mid-70s every day.
Nice, gotta love it.
You gotta love it.
Well, I don't recall if that's where you're from, but we always like to start the podcast about your early years. So tell us where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
So I was born in a town called Lynn, Massachusetts. It's outside of Boston. That's where my parents and grandparents lived at the time. Um, Back then it was a shoe town. A lot of shoes were manufactured in the Northeast in uh, the early 30s through the 40s. And we then moved to a small town that's just west of Boston called Woburn.
Oh yeah.
And I lived there until I was 10. And then we moved to Michigan. And I've been here pretty much ever since.
We actually have a client in Wilbur, so I know that well. And mom and dad, what kind of work did they do? Mom worked in the home, or did she have an outside job? Dad, what was his profession?
Both my parents were first generation, um, and so my father worked a number of different jobs over his career. Um, he started off working in a drugstore, ended up managing a small drugstore. Then the firm went out of business. Then worked selling liquor. Um, so he was a liquor salesman throughout the Massachusetts area, sold to bars and stores. After that, he didn't like that particularly, became a manager of a candy store for a very short time. Out of work after that. And so he then started to work with a couple of mechanics. He'd buy wrecked cars, have the mechanics fix them up and sell them. Uh, that wasn't very lucrative. And so when I was about 5 or 6, my mother became a secretary. She had gone to school to do that. And then when I was about 8 years old, our my mother was from Windsor, Canada, so her family came to visit us. There were two brothers and two sisters, and they saw the way we were living. As far as I was concerned, it was fine because I knew no better. My bedroom was actually the closet in my parents' room. It was one of those that had a little window, and so I slept in there on a cot. And they thought that we were not living as we should be. So they convinced my father that he should go to Detroit, and because Detroit is right across the border from
Yeah.
Windsor. And so he went to Detroit ahead of us, found a job, and then came back, and we moved to Michigan when I was 10.
So both
And
your parents were Canadian, is that right? So that was
no,
the
my
okay.
father actually is from Massachusetts.
Okay.
He was from Massachusetts. My mother was from Windsor. My mother went to visit a sister in Massachusetts, and that's when my parents
That's
met.
really laid up. And brothers and sisters?
I have an older brother.
Older brother. Got it.
Yes, and uh, he's a physician. Has been for his, you know, he's been a physician in his head since he was 5 years old. My parents, my parents would have nothing less, right? Firstborn had to be a doctor.
How to be a doctor. Yeah, love it. Well, you made a comment earlier, and when we grow up as kids, we really just don't know the difference, do we? Right?
No,
It's we,
no.
we kind of accept our own environment. What were some of the childhood memories, if you think back to, maybe some of the things that inspired you or influenced you when you were growing up?
So, I mean, both my parents worked, so I was home alone an awful lot. But I guess if I look back at it, seeing both of my parents work, both of them uh, focused on making a living and trying to make a better life for them and us as kids, instilled sort of a work ethic in us, both my brother and me. So I think that sticks out. My parents, interestingly, when we lived in Massachusetts, we rented this little house. It was a duplex from a woman and a man next door, and they are the ones that when I came home from school, I would go to their house so that I would have some supervision, and I became they were just a very open, accepting couple. They had no children of their own, and just I learned a lot just dealing with them in my growing up. I
They
mean,
looked after you. Yeah.
they did.
What
Yeah.
What about school? Did that come easy for you? Did you have a favorite subject? Were you a good student?
Yeah, it was so it came it I was not a good student. I got good grades, but I was certainly not a good student. I had like a 3.4 in high school, but I didn't I didn't really care about school, especially in the first 2 years of high school. I I, um, I think part of it was my brother was a huge overachiever, and in my head I said I'm not going to compete with this.
Right.
So I didn't come home and study every day. I didn't, but I was able to get good grades. So interesting. As I started in my junior and senior year, that's when I realized that I would probably be going to college. Although my parents talked about it, I'm not sure. I wasn't. I was concerned that they may not have the funds to even help me go to college, and how I was going to get there, what I was going to do. And, but junior and senior year, I paid a little more attention to college, studying, and but I was never in high school a studious individual.
Did you pursue sports? What were some of the things you spent your time with?
Basically, I worked during high school. Um, did I play sports? Not never professional. I mean, not professionally, but in a school league or any of that. I had friends that I would, play basketball with or football with, but it was never. I never pursued. It was never encouraged to pursue
Hmm.
um, sports. My parents never even focused on that. I mean, I don't think they even had a clue about sports in high school. So
But you went to Hillsdale College. Now that
I did.
was that a local college, or tell us a little bit
No.
about the choice there?
Okay. Yeah. Hillsdale. Again, my brother went to the University of Michigan, and we went to the same high school. It was a magnet high school. You had to take a test to get in and so forth. And so I took the test, went to the magnet high school, which was downtown Detroit. You had to take a bus to get there, a city bus, and every day. And it was specialty. They had a high school prep, a college prep course that I went to, and that's when I made the decision to go to college. Now, my brother went to the University of Michigan, as I said, and I didn't want to go to the same university that he went to. I thought it was time to distinguish myself, and so I said I'm going to go to a small school. And so Hillsdale is a small college, and it is a conservative college. It was conservative when I went there. Now it is extremely conservative. Uh, it takes no federal funds and didn't when I went there. So it's not bound by the federal government. Um, it was in 1984 that the government said, well, if you it came after them and wanted them to start to fill out all of these forms and be a compliance college in the federal sense. And what ended up happening was Hillsdale said, well, the major issue was uh, taking the GI Bill. They said, well, if you take the GI Bill, you're taking federal funds. So they said, well, we're not going to take the GI Bill anymore. And we have, if any GI comes here, we'll cover their cost to be here
Hmm.
at the same level as the GI Bill.
Love the independence.
They are truly independent. And I think they've become a bit more extreme than when I was there, but I appreciated and learned from that when I was there. And Hillsdale for me was a growing experience. First I joined a fraternity. I became treasurer, and then I was elected to the what they called the federation, which was the governing body, student governing body. And I was on that, and then I became president of the student body.
Wow,
So
cool.
yeah,
And got yourself a business degree, and I think you went straight on to get your MBA after
I
that. Now,
I did
that
I
wasn't
did.
so common back in those days because that
Well,
was kind of the mid '60s.
right. It was more common then than it certainly is now. Now
Yeah,
you're encouraged to get 5 years of work experience,
right, right.
3 or 5, and before you get your MBA. Um, and I see the value in that today that I didn't see then. However, there was a very specific reason that came to I came to understand quickly. When I graduated Hillsdale, the average salary coming out of college for a business student was about 7,000 a year. If you got your MBA, you could expect somewhere around 10,000.
And
So
this is
for
the
a
mid '60s, listeners. So
yeah,
that
this is well,
wasn't
yeah,
bad money back then.
yeah, no, late. It was late. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's put things in perspective. It was sort of like I graduated undergraduate school. I hate to say this in '67. Probably a lot of the listeners weren't even born back then. And in '67, and that's when I went directly into get my MBA. And so yeah, it was a year and a half. I did it in a year and a half. I took classes, day and night, worked part time, and was able to then graduate and did get $10,000 a year. So for a year and a half, you got almost a 50% increase in
Yeah,
your starting salary.
that's a good investment of time.
It
Very good
was.
investment time. Now you chose Wayne State. Tell us about that selection. What led you there?
Well, my wife and I got married when I was a senior, just graduate, late in my senior year of college, and we both lived in the Detroit area. Wayne is a school here, um, and it had an MBA program. It has a fairly good business school. So I applied and got accepted and decided to go there.
That's great. And what was the first job that you took coming out of Wayne State?
Well, the job I took coming out of Wayne State was a result of a job I had my sophomore, my excuse me, my junior year and senior year of college. Um, Kmart, the predecessor to Kmart was SS Kresge, which is a five and dime store or a variety store, they used to call them back then. It compares probably to a five and below store today, is the best I can sort of put it in perspective. And I got a job working as what they called a summer trainee in a Kresge store. Um, and it was a program where they supposedly trained you to be store managers, material. So that was my first job. And well, it wasn't my first job, but it was a job during that sort of pushed me towards a career. And at the time, so I did that my junior and senior year. Uh, and then the store manager asked me, because I was going on for my MBA, if I would come in um, during the week part time or on Saturday part time, because the young man who managed the stockroom got drafted,
Oh,
and he
and
needed
these are
someone.
the Vietnam years, folks.
That's correct. And he needed someone to cover the stockroom and manage, then go on the floor. So it just so happens one Saturday when I was working, the CEO of the company at the time, the guy who actually took Kresge and converted it to Kmart and grew Kmart. It was his concept and idea. He was the CEO, came into the store,
Huh.
and he introduced the store manager introduced me to him and told him that I was working on my MBA and so forth. So he asked me if I planned on going to work for Kmart when I graduated. And I said absolutely not. And he said why was that? I said candidly, I said I don't want to spend 13 years as an assistant manager like Mr. Young here before I get a store or before I can move up. Um, and he said, "Well, when you're ready to graduate, you come see me."
Hmm.
So,
Invitation.
yeah, an invitation. So I had uh, interviewed with banks and automotive companies, and I thought I was probably going to go to work for a bank. And then I went to see him, and he said, because of our conversation, we've started a new program, for young men who and women who he didn't say women, but women who graduated with an MBA. Um, and so he introduced me to the then vice president of HR, at that time called personnel.
Right.
And he told me about this program and said there would be 3 or 4 of us hired, and we would get to be on a rotational program for 2 years, and then we would be able to work where we wanted. And it would my salary requirement of $10,000 a year.
That's great.
So I can tell you it was a short-lived program. We were the only 3 ever hired. But it was for me it was a great program. I started off in research. I then had to work in the stores for 6 months, actually a Kmart store. And one day I get a call to come in and to the corporate office, and they said that um, they wanted to send me away to a school course because they had this program. And basically, what it was is a consulting firm came in, and in the 60s, there weren't computers like there are today. There were tons of paper everywhere.
Right.
Well, you can imagine if you have 1,000 stores sending in all of their receipts from every day into the corporate office so that they could be somehow keyed in, to accounting to get it paid, to get these invoices paid. It was a huge, huge endeavor that required lots and lots of people. And this
Right.
consulting firm basically said that they could reduce the amount of people handling and doing this work by 20% and improve, in addition to improving productivity, could streamline the operation. Um, and so there was some skepticism on the part of management. But so the consulting firm said, well, we have a course to train analysts in how this process works. And this person, after this course, if you send a person, they should be able to come back and at least give you an assessment of whether this process can work or not. So I was the one selected to go. This is in my career, I've had a number of opportunities that I just call luck, being at the right place at the right time.
Right.
And this was one of them. So I went to this class, and I think it was like 3 weeks of time. It was in Fairfield, Connecticut, and for whatever reason, it's basically industrial engineering for clerical work. Um, and it used a system what they call predetermined times, and you would study a job, and you could figure out how long it should take for a person to do it. And the average clerical worker works, and I bet it's the same even today, at about 55% of what they should work,
Hmm.
or maximum, if you will. So that was the whole premise of how you could save this 20%. So I took the course, I understood it. For whatever reason, it came very easy to me. And my instructor said that on the final, I had done better than anybody else. So I came back, and so the VP that I was that sent me there said, "Do you think you could do it yourself without the company?" And I said yes. So um, I wrote up a outline of how to do it. I presented it to the vice president, and then they approved it, and we started this program. And it started in every department we went into. We were able to save a minimum of 20% in terms of labor. Now,
Wow.
we built in some things in there that said no one will be fired or laid off. We'll wait till someone quits, or we can move them to another department, because clearly you didn't want it to have all negative consequences related to this, because people wouldn't cooperate. So we did the study. Within a year and a half to 2 years, we were saving a $500,000 a year in labor.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah,
Great stuff. Well, you spent about 5 6 years at Kmart. I know you were shortly at another company, but I want to get into Handleman because so rarely do you find someone who starts pretty close to entry level and makes it all the way to chairman and CEO. And you were there for almost 30 years. What
correct.
what attracted you to Handleman? Tell us a little bit about that company.
So at one point in my earlier in my life, I had met the then CEO of the company, David Handleman, and I had run into him when I was at Fruhoff Corporation. And I was about to get a promotion there in another area. I worked in what was called industrial relations and negotiated labor contracts. Um, and I wanted to be more in operations. And he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and he said, "Well, I'd like you to come to work for our company. You tell me what you want to do, and I'm sure we'll make it happen." So I did, and he asked me what I was making, and I told him, and he uh, beat that offer by about 25%, or not the offer, but my salary.
Right.
Uh, Gave me the opportunity to work in um, operations where I started, and from there, um, I had I had the opportunity, again, sort of by luck, to move to do some work in sales. There was a small customer that came that we acquired, that was only 3 stores, and it was managed by a local. We had warehouses that we called branches, and then um, it they agreed to give us more stores, which put it across multiple warehouses. And someone said to me, "Here, why don't you manage this account in addition to what you're doing?" So I said, "Sure." And I learned a lot from that job, on how to deal with difficult buyers. The buyer at this, it was called Hill's Department Store. They had about 138 stores. They were primarily um, Ohio, Pennsylvania, in that region. So the buyer was, they were a tough um, firm, and the buyer was always under pressure. So he would always call with a problem and say something like, "You got to, I'm telling you, I'm going to take this away if you don't get this done." And I would say to him, "Tom, you don't need to threaten me. Just tell me what needs to be done. I'll take care of it." And after a while, we began to get into a working relationship, and he knew that I would take care of it. And but it was truly a learning experience. So
Now, Handleman was a retailer as well, correct?
no, we were
Supply
primarily a distributor.
distributor. Got
Yes,
it. Got
we
it.
distributed at that time. Well, we distributed pre. I call it pre-recorded music and books, but it was in this was in 81, 82. It was LPs and cassettes, uh,
Right.
and that's what we distributed. And what we did is we essentially managed the music departments in mass merchants. So if you went into a Kmart or a Walmart, or on the East Coast, a James Way, a Hills, or in the Midwest, a Venture, we would be the ones that would decide what CDs and cassettes went into the
Ah,
store,
okay.
how, ship it in. We'd have reps that would go into the stores, merchandise it, make sure we would provide the fixtures, and manage the music department. We didn't have people in there selling, but we did all of the backroom work for the retailer.
All right. Cool. And so operations became kind of your entry point. And how did you progress through management? What were some of the things that you learned along the way from leadership that allowed you to eventually take that corner office?
So, as I said, I then got into, I started off in operations, and early, probably the second year I was there, we had no Walmart stores, and Walmart at that time was a very, very small customer. I mean, retailer in the early 80s. They didn't have, maybe they had 150 stores, 200 stores. And we were assigned 48 of them, from one of our competitors. We'd gone in and sold them. And I was given the opportunity to, to manage the takeover of those stores. So uh, the vice president of sales brings me into Walmart, and I meet with, um, I guess at that time he was executive vice president, and the vice president of sales said to me, "Tell Bill how we're going to manage this." And so did have a plan. I laid it out, and then Bill said to me, "All right, you be back here in 3 weeks, and you tell me how successful you've been."
Huh.
So it was great because I am focused when I have a goal. And I laid out. I had this plan. We brought people in from all over the area that we were taking over. I think we brought 18 supervisors in. We laid out how we were going to take them over. Everything was planned out. They went out and worked with the teams in their areas. And we took over the 47 stores in 3 weeks. We had to identify the inventory, change fixtures, do all of the things. And I went back, laid out what we accomplished, and Walmart was pleased with that. And fortunately, this fellow at Walmart recognized, what our team was able to accomplish. And he called me, and we became, I wouldn't say friends, but business associates over the next 10 years.
Mm.
So
So you grew with them.
I did.
Yeah, fabulous. And how long were you there? Did you take over from the CEO that hired you, the gentleman that you had met?
No, there was
Oh,
someone in between.
right,
Uh, what happened is um, the CEO that hired me was David Handleman. It was a family business.
right.
Even though we were public, it was always run by family. And he was in his, I would guess, at that time, late 60s, early 70s. And
Mm,
the board was saying to him, you need to get someone in place to take over when you retire. And so he hired, well, the board, and he hired the managing partner from, at that time, it was Coopers and Lybrand, now PricewaterhouseCoopers, from the office in Detroit. And he came in and he was hired as president. He was president for about 6 years and then became CEO for about a year.
mm,
And he left somewhat abruptly. And
mm.
that was in 1988. And I, at that time, I was COO, and I managed the video business for Handleman, which we started in '84. So at that, and so the then chairman, who was the fellow who hired me, David Handelman, he called me in and said that I would be uh, president and COO. And then a year later, the board elected me to be CEO.
CEO, fabulous. And how would you say kind of your leadership style evolved over that time, Steve?
Uh, it evolved. You know, so there's a quote that I like. It's from the Warren Bennis, who is the former dean of a business school at USC, and he was that was a lot of years ago, I guess, but the quote still um, strikes a chord with me. It's called "Managers do things right, while leaders do the right thing."
There you go. Love that.
And so you had it's a difficult move, right, from being a manager of things to becoming a leader, and to move away from focusing and just on day to day and managing, then and moving into leadership.
Yeah, love that. Thinking back when you were hiring people, what did you look for, for the folks that you invested and hired in there at Hendelman?
Well, you know, depending on the position you're hiring for, the first thing they have to have is the skill set to take over that position. If it's a fellow who's managing HR or IT or whatever area it is, they have to have the basic skills to deal with that particular entity. Then you need to look at their management style. Ask them some questions, understand their management style, understand if the way that their management style and where they came from meshes with your culture.
Hmm.
Because if you look back, I mean, there is each company has its own culture. It is different, and when I was younger, I never understood it, but it is so true, um, that culture is critical, to a company's growing, but also in terms of a hire. A good example of that is GE. Their culture was so different than other companies, and it was exhibited, very starkly when Welch retired,
Right.
and the three top executives went to other companies to run them, and two of those three executives failed.
Yeah.
And they failed, I think, because GE's culture was so much different than the companies they went into. And so you had to understand when you were interviewing people, would they work in your culture? Would they be able to survive? Did they have a, a positive attitude? Were they focused on people and managing people well? Were they knowledgeable, around the entire industry, not just managing the entity. For example, especially in IT, it was a growing area. There were a lot of things that were happening at that time, or throughout that time, and still to this day. Do they understand where I'll call it the market is going to go, and do they understand that, and will they be able to help your company grow and move in that direction?
Yeah, so critical. Did you have a favorite, interview approach? Because that's culture's hard to get at, right? It's very difficult within a 15, 20 minute, 1 hour interview to kind of get under the skin. But, did you have a certain way in which you tried to get at that, level of, hey, is this guy really going to fit, or this woman really going to fit within our company culture? How'd you
Um,
try to determine that?
we did, and we also used some outside resources, especially with, now I'm talking about more senior management.
Right.
We used outside resources that would help, us evaluate them. But in addition, to that, you had to make sure that there was if they were reporting to me, a connection between me and that individual. Could I have a conversation with them? Were they open, honest? We had a, we the C the company Handleman was, when I took over as CEO, um, was still a family company that had gone public, and it needed to become more of a professionally run company. And so we hired a COO who worked with me, and the two of us worked together, to try and create a more professional environment. We put in a set of values, that everyone knew, um, and we focused on those values, um, and to make sure that, uh, the company and the people would be, deliver against them. So they were simple. Uh, the first was honesty and integrity. You had to be honest. You had to have integrity. The second was accountability. You had to be held accountable for what you did. And the third was continuous learning and improvement. We always had to continue to grow, learn, improve. And the final one, was focused on the stakeholders.
Mm,
And stakeholders in our case, there were four of them. There was obviously, uh, there were our customers. There were our people who in our company. They were the suppliers, because we were in the middle, right? So we're a little bit different. We had to make sure that we worked with our suppliers to help us be successful. And then there were the shareholders, and I think they were probably, uh, the most difficult group to deal with, because you have lots of investors, and they have different points of view and make different demands.
Yeah, great stuff. Steve, we're just about out of time, but we always have one last question we ask all our CEO guests, and that's what career and life advice would you give to someone who maybe has their own eyes on a corner office someday?
Three things. And I said this in a presentation I made to some college graduate, just seniors ready to graduate from Wayne. I made a presentation to them. And I said there are three things to focus on. The first is when you get a job, focus on doing that job as good as you possibly can, because that's the basis on which you're going to be evaluated. You're going to move forward on that. Second, have a vision of where you would like to be. You know, do you want to be in that corner office, or do you want to be um, somewhere in senior management? You don't want the responsibility of a CEO. I had a guy who worked for me who actually said he wanted to be a CFO and never wanted to be a CEO, and he did become a CFO. The third is take a positive, focus, be positive. Your attitude is critical in a work environment. And if you're a negative, and we all have seen people who are negative in a work environment, they bring down the the organization. They bring down the organization in which they work in. No one wants to go to work with negative people who are always complaining, always finding the things that are wrong and never what's right, and focused on moving forward in a positive way. And if you follow those, I think that's a good start for heading into to becoming a CEO.
Sage Counsel. My guest today is Stephen Strome. He's the former chairman and chief executive officer of Handleman Company. Steve, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. I appreciated it.
Hey, listeners, we're now including your questions with our CEO guests. If you'd like to send in a voice memo, send it to info@go4roi.com, and we'll read it on the air to one of our future CEO guests. Thanks so much for listening, and share it with friends.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.go4roi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.